The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. A leper came to Jesus and kneeling down begged him and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, "I do will it. Be made clean." The leprosy left him immediately, and he was made clean. Then, warning him sternly, he dismissed him at once. He said to him, "See that you tell no one anything, but go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." The man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places, and people kept coming to him from everywhere. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
A leper came to Jesus. Sounds very simple, but when you look at, try to go deeper into the meaning of leper, it looks quite differently. It's not just a sick person asking Jesus for healing. It's a leper. I feel like until this pandemic, we have not fully realized the implications of such a condition. Of course, we're not accustomed, thanks be to God, and thanks be to God also for the advances of modern medicine, which has defeated something as terrible as leprosy. But while we're not accustomed with leprosy, we have not realized until now the other dimensions of an illness like that. That meant isolation, quarantine, and not just for 2 weeks, but actually for the rest of your life, without hope of ever getting better. When you experienced, and most of us have experienced either a quarantine or maybe more than one, isolation if you had COVID, you know how hard it is, that severance from society, that severance in relationships. The human being is relational by nature. And when that aspect of our lives is affected, we are not well. We don't do well. Because that goes against our nature. Okay? You can do that for a little bit of time, but then there are consequences. The more you do it, there are consequences of that. No wonder that our mental health suffers because of that. While some things have to be put in place for safety, realize the heavy cross of something like this. The mental, the spiritual aspect, not just the physical aspect of illness. A leper came to Jesus. What we heard in the Old Testament, in the first reading, those were Old Testament kind of social distancing rules. You have to make your condition known to others in some way. You have to live aside, apart from the rest of the community. What did that mean for a father, for a mother, for a child, for an elderly person? What did that mean? Terrible when you think about it. Terrible. Isolation and no hope of getting better. You can see why God in that situation is your only source of hope. You can see that why a man like the leper in the gospel came to Jesus, breaking the social distancing rule and saying, "If you wish, you can make me clean. You can heal me if you wish." We know from the Gospels that Jesus is greatly moved by the acts of faith, by the trust in him. Jesus is deeply moved by that. Even from non-Jewish people, he's always moved. And he's kind of frustrated in the Gospels. The times when we see Jesus a little unhappy about something, it's usually because of the lack of faith. The lack of faith moves him, the faith moves him, and the lack of faith upsets him. So that man putting all his hope in Jesus and saying, if you wish, you can heal me. And Jesus breaks the social distancing rule too. As God, as the one who had the power to heal, he touches the man. And he says, I do wish, be healed. And it happens because he is God. And as in the creation, he says and things are done. He commands. He has that authority. He has that power that only God can have. It is in history, Christians have always had a special attention to the sick, to the ill persons. Whether individuals or entire religious orders were founded with this in mind, of taking care of the ill, of the suffering. Such is the case, for example, in the 16th century of the Order of Chameleons. They were a religious order founded just having hospitals and taking care of the sick. I was blessed to study during my seminary with a chameleon brother. It was quite interesting to see a priest who was both a surgeon and a priest. It's very rare when you think about it, but they exist. They exist. And in closer to our times, we have the example of someone like Saint Damien de Veuster or Saint Damien of Molokai, who left his native land of Belgium. His brother, who was supposed to go as a missionary to Hawaii, got sick, and he said, I'll take my brother's place, and I volunteered to go to Hawaii as a missionary. After 5 months voyage to Hawaii, he learned, he became a priest, he was ordained a priest there, and there was a need on one of the islands of Hawaii, the island of Molokai, which became a whole quarantine. Actually, if you think about it, the word isolation comes from island. So literally, islands are, even physically, the representation of isolation. So there was this island that was where lepers were being put in isolation. And everybody else kept distance, stayed away from it. He was so moved by the needs of these people, this entire category of people, again, fathers, mothers, children, elderly, people of every condition, who were just put there waiting to die. He gave his life, literally. He became ill of leprosy. I think about 14 years that he served there, to be one with them, to do what Jesus did, physically touching them, bringing them the sacraments, hearing their confessions, loving them, and walking with them. Because they were humans. They were not less humans than the others. So did St. Marianne Cope, another collaborator of St. Damien, who lived with him there on the island and became a saint in tending to the lepers. Closer to our times, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. By this time, of course, there was a cure for the disease. And Mother Teresa worked hard both in reaching in the faith and loving these persons, but defeating the social stigma that accompanied this illness, the fear of people around lepers, but also bringing them medical healing, physical healing. Another great name, again, these are all people who were inspired by the faith, inspired by Jesus, have approached the lepers physically to heal them, is Raoul Follereau, a Frenchman who who started a foundation, probably the biggest foundation in the world, for lepers, both to physically help lepers and at the same time to help regain their rights. As he was trying to educate himself about the life of Charles de Foucault, and who lived in northern Africa, he was walking on his footsteps and ran into some people that were hiding behind a bush and kind of always hiding away. And he asked, why are these people hiding? What's the problem with them? And they said, oh, they're lepers. Like, well, what do you mean they're lepers? Oh, they're lepers. Kind of like they're subhuman, a subhuman category without rights, without human rights. It's kind of easy to, because of fear, it's kind of easy to fall into considering someone, depriving them of their rights and forgetting that they are human beings. And just like you and I have needs, physical, spiritual, mental. We're all this, and without this we suffer. You and I may not encounter lepers in our lifetime, okay? I've never encountered one. But we all encounter persons who, for one reason or another, bear the cross of suffering, be it physical suffering, be it spiritual suffering, or mental illness. While none of us would dream of, would think, fathom of keeping a distance from someone who is physically ill and needs our help, needs our love, for some reason, it's almost like an unconscious way of dealing with people when they're in mental suffering. There is a social stigma associated with mental illness. If someone tells you that they suffer from this physical illness, we treat them in one way. Our reaction naturally is one way, and it is good. If they suffer from a mental illness, depending on the type of illness, there's kind of interiorly a distancing that occurs right away. A lot of it is because of ignorance. Ignorance. Granted, there's so much to know out there, and the spectrum of mental illness is so wide. But we can do something about it. We can learn about the people close to us. What does OCD mean? What does anxiety? How can I help someone with anxiety? It won't work just telling them not to be afraid. We know that, right? There's so much to learn about what it means. And instead of labeling and creating in our mind all kinds of presuppositions about the condition, about the person, we can educate ourselves and learn to approach that person in love. Because the truth is that mental illness is a heavy cross to bear. And it is a heavy cross to bear alone and with a stigma attached to it. Just like Christ, you and I, although not therapists, we're not professionals in that area, but we are called to bring healing by touching in our own way, according to our own expertise, our own gifts, to bring healing and to touch that person who is suffering. We may not bring the healing, the exact healing they need. We leave that to who's able to do that. But we can greatly help them carry that cross. It means much more than you can imagine. Hearing from persons who have experienced that gentle touch, loving touch, when they were suffering, it's incredible when you hear about it. This pandemic has only exacerbated a lot of mental illnesses. a kind word, patience in reacting to people when they struggle, because everyone is struggling. No matter how much they may be hiding it, everyone is struggling in one way or another. It goes a long way. Patience, a kind word, even when they don't deserve it. We don't love the neighbor because they deserve it. We love the neighbor because Christ loved us. And Christ called us and gave us the grace to love our neighbor and to love our neighbor well. So we have a huge work to do. We have a lot of lepers around us, sometimes even closer to us than we want to acknowledge. We may be the ones who are like that leper in the gospel, who's carrying a heavy cross and is afraid of saying, I need you. I need your help. I need your love. Heal me. Let us, brothers and sisters, do what Christ did.